I'll be very quick because we've run over time. It's my pleasure to call back to the stage Christopher Brown, who needs no introduction, but as I like to call him in the office, dear leader, come and enlighten us on your vision for the Aerotropolis.
I like it when you call me dear leader too. Who doesn't want to be a tin pot Korean dictator? Hey, before I tee off, can I first thank you all? One thing I recognise, it's a hell of a summit week. We have Ausrail on this week. We've got a Growth Centres Alliance meeting for the councils in Canberra. We had the Bradfield oration yesterday. We had the AFR summit this week. It's been a long week. A lot of you have been a lot of this, and I appreciate the fact those of us in the public policy space who need your involvement, I'm most grateful. I wanted to talk about a lovely little subject lovingly referred to as Quango Unchained. Now, for those of you not as old as me in the room, like all of my staff, except for Luke who wrote it originally, what's a Quango? It's what we call SOX these days, what we call government enterprises. It used to be the trendy term in the 70s. So, and for those of you who are Tarantino fans, maybe it's a Django Unchained. Let's see if I can go a little Tarantino and Sydney's planning in Aerotropolis now. As I wrote stuff down, I'm so old I've got to read with glasses too these days. So. In December 2026, just 2 short years from now, Australia will witness a once-in-a-century opportunity as we open a brand new 24-hour major gateway airport linked by a brand new metro and a futuristic Aerotropolis to be built on its fringe. It should be a Christmas blessing for millions of young kids across Western Sydney that no longer be denied access to the global markets, the global jobs, and the global opportunities they have been for so long. Western Sydney International and its adjacent new city centre is the game-changing project our region and this dialogue demanded, it secured, and it fully deserves. But this blessing needs to be more than just award-winning earthworks, more than a concrete pour, terminal building, a new information centre and MOUs. It requires a detailed plan to leverage the unparalleled regional opportunity this bit of infrastructure will enable. A plan that is personally championed by our Prime Minister and our Premier working together. It needs also an agency to drive it. It needs an empowered Western Parkland City that has the ambition, the muscle, the personnel and the funding to properly secure our future. This is a really inherently personal issue to me. While publicly advocating for the development of the airport and its associated rail links at the beginning of this decade when the dialogue was kicked off, I made a lot of personal promises to a community who wasn't that keen on the airport at the time. And that promise was that with that airport would come smart jobs for the future. I probably made a lifelong enemy in the member for Chifley for having the hide to advocate that airport. He still hasn't forgiven me. But unlike some others, I reckon the kids of Mount Druitt deserve a future that an airport like this provides. I had the pleasure with Jennifer Westacott to sit on then Minister Albanese's committee that eventually selected Badgerys Creek as the site for Sydney's Long Airport. Headed up with Adam and Western Sydney Rail Alliance to ensure there was a train there to link the airport the day it opened. Not only to Sydney's second airport, but importantly Western Sydney's first airport, and have backed the Aerotropolis ever since. However, similar hopes we've had for dynamic projects in the West in years past, that promised smart jobs and a global reach. We don't want to repeat the mistakes where a lack of ambition and political resolve bedevil governments, and the affected industries and communities fail to inspire, lobby and reward or punish those governments for their actions. Sadly for me, Olympic Park comes to mind as an example of a precinct that promised so much, that started so strongly, but on any objective analysis over some time has fallen short of its potential. Despite the recent heroic efforts of people like Liz Devlin to try and bring common sense and a greater sense of delivery impetus to the region. So what will the fate of the airport and the Aerotropolis be? Here, as we stand on the eve of Christmas 2023, we are at a critical inflection point. The pandemic's behind us, elections have delivered new sheriffs in Macquarie Street in Canberra, and the opening of Australia's newest airport and the Metro line is looming very fast. Where to for the Greater West, the region that for too long has been seen by many people as simply a dormitory suburb, a dumping ground for booming migration. There has to be a better future for us. I accept that ambition is a tricky term in politics, especially for new state and federal governments that are cash constrained, and they both believe they won their election mandate here in Western Sydney because of their view that locals' resistance to too much infrastructure, too much growth, too much change, and not enough essential services. They're partly right, but continued population explosion and inbuilt development momentum with 2 metros, an airport near Metropolis, motorways, housing, hospitals, schools and university campuses means that growth's going to come whether government want it or not, so you better get on board. The only viable solution is to jump in, boots and all, throw off the caution, maybe not with billions of dollars of more money now, but with a genuine commitment to microeconomic reform. Governments can't have it both ways. They can't not spend their own money and then continually get in your way to spend your money because we need the growth regardless. In New South Wales, it demands a new political appetite to cast off business as usual. We need a bold, brave new government in an era, and that's not always politically attractive. And it needs a greater commitment to private capital to achieve this. After so many years we've endured of natural disasters, privatisation proceeds and the river of cash Treasury have had, and pandemics, where the obvious solution to almost any problem was throw more government money at it, build another government agency to do it, we have to do it more smartly. We've got to find a way to bring private sector capital back to the table, private sector ingenuity, real community engagement and genuine partnerships. Frankly, we have to wean government off being governing just a little bit. It's been a remarkable period, ironically, for a coalition government to lead the most bullish Labor-like public spending campaign of all time. We know that money's dried up. How do we go forward to ensure our future? How do we not have Western Sydney again be a great idea that falls off the perch every decade and we've got to start again? I have to say, it has to be recognised, over the past decade, the boomtown that is Western Sydney has been categorised by visionary strategic planning, by bold governance reform and massive public investment. History will be very kind to the coalition governments we've had in the West, including particular champions like Mike Baird and Stuart Ayres and Rob Stokes and others, and the recycled capital they invested in building the steel spines across our region. They were backed brilliantly by a group of people working underneath them, people like Kirsten we've heard, like Tim Reardon and Lucy Turnbull and Jeff Roberts, people who really leant in, got it and changed the debate around this region forever. We had city deals, a new airport, motorways, metro rail lines, GSC's 3-city model, South Creek protection, and a second CBD in Parramatta, resplendent with Parramatta Square with government and private tenants, new light rail, an upgraded Riverside Theatre, and the magnificent Powerhouse Museum still to come. They're all testament to that. Across the West, they built new hospitals, stadia, launched the West Invest Fund, drove city shaping and precinct plans, proposed a new Warragamba Dam wall, conceived the Aerotropolis, and signed MOUs with countless global investors with their intent to invest. Yep, it was a golden era of urban regeneration, the like of which we haven't seen before in Australia, the like of which we're going back to East London next year to visit again, be part of that journey. But it can also be characterised harshly as an era of unrealised ambition and a job only half done. History at the same time will be far less kind to those politicians and bureaucrats who ignored the need for affordable housing for so long and let public housing stock go into decay. The coalition relied way too much on high tolls and development levies and not enough on private finance, and left the West to swelter and burn in summer heat while denying locals the chance at places like Penrith Lakes at Moore Point to open up the waterways of the West. We lament the fact they neglected to train and pay and recruit the teachers and nurses that the shiny new hospitals and schools needed. And they let TAFE languish when it should have been empowered and funded to meet labour shortages in the building trades. Locals won't forgive those who did not coordinate or fund their own water and transport agencies to provide essential development concurrence, letting developers sway in the wind as they bounce between government agencies trying to get approvals. Those who preferred Moore Park over Olympic Park when it came to upgraded stadia, and Darling Harbour over Homebush when it came to its own convention facilities. I pay credit to the fact that the reinvestment that did come in Parramatta Stadium was fantastic, and I'm promised we will get a roof on Australia's big house, Kerry, at some stage, won't we? We campaign for the roof we need. It was frankly shameful, the cowering the government did to both the Labor and Liberal MPs for Bankstown and East Hills, who said to their own constituents, "Nick off, you're not getting a new hospital in the CBD." It was shameful, and that has to come to an end very soon, to stand alongside that magnificent university campus we awarded last night as Project of the Year. It needs a revised shopping centre one side, the council the other, and a hospital and university alongside each other, and a new TAFE. Finally, we'll never forget in Western Sydney the day the streets were locked down in pandemic by soldiers and policemen, while the people of the eastern suburbs partied with gay abandon on Bondi Beach. That is something that is not a proud history of governance of this place. Or the fact that the Public Apology Fund, Westinvest, was squandered through a bit of political partisanship by both sides. Sadly, they largely ignored the central river city. It's too hard, apparently, to take on communities in brownfields. They went for the cow pastures and koala habitats of the outer west to maximise development. But even then, they broke their promise. They've not delivered, and the new government still has not yet delivered yet, the rapid bus network they were promised to get to the airport, the cities of Campbelltown, Penrith and Liverpool. As I said earlier, though, in many ways, the situation in the Western Parkland City now is reflective of what Sydney faced in 1995. When you've been around doing this game as long as I have, you see multiple cycles and the similarities that come up. In 1995, a new Labor government came to office in New South Wales after the coalition had the bravery and the bollocks, basically, to bid for and achieve a successful bid for the Sydney Olympic Games. They then set about with a great range of strategic planning, consultation to get ready and go, to host the Games right here in Western Sydney, right here at in the Olympic precinct, but as was known back in those days, the old Homebush Abattoir, where I grew up working. Yes, a very personal connection to this site. While the Greiner and Fahey government's ambition was very laudable, their follow-through was poor. There was little development progress in the few years after Juan Antonio Samaranch said the winner is Sydney, and we faced the global embarrassment of potentially failed games. The same disaster scenario that overtook the Victorian government with regard to the recent Commonwealth Games. This threat Labor inherited in 1995 required the Carr government to dig deep, to set up an Olympic Coordination Authority under a tough minister in Michael Knight and an even tougher Coordinator General, David Richmond, to change legislation and bulldoze its own bureaucracy and polite community engagement to get the job done. And that's what they did, to welcome the world here at Australia's home ground in September 2000. Sadly, however, in a constant example, it lost momentum soon after the Olympic flame went out. Premier Carr determined that Sydney and announced Sydney was full. The government put up its feet, and the Olympic Park and much of Western Sydney went back to the traditional state of development inertia, while the Labor government office spent the next decade being infrastructure indolent, ignored its traditional electoral heartland here in the West, and was tossed out of office unceremoniously in 2011 amid a cacophony of corruption and incompetence. Anyway, enough now of the brickbats and bouquets. Let me take the cranky pants off and get a little productive. Where to then with a legacy of big thinking, of major planning and high ambition, matched with a lack of community confidence, broken promises and a new government? So I'm very proud to table a provocative policy paper called Rebooting Delivery. It's on your tables, available at all great bookshops. Authored by the Dialogue's Head of Research, Luke Turner, who was just up here, in partnership with the smart people at Astrolabe, which examines the past, present and future trajectory of not only the Western Parkland City Authority, but its sibling agency, the other Quango, the Sydney Olympic Park Authority. This paper, with summaries on your table, talks about the life cycle of state development agencies, the Quangos, and the need for a social contract with local government and the communities they represent. It makes recommendations reflecting their respective points in that cycle and makes a case for governance reforms to drive better outcomes for our region. In the spirit of consolidation of increasingly scarce public money, and recognising that this precinct here is in the final stages of that agency life cycle, the report recommends the timely and polite wind down of SOPA, with its functions to be eventually replaced by existing state and local government agencies. You have to ask yourself, if we're being honest, why have SOPA run the Millennium Parklands when Josh French's Great Sydney Parklands Trust exists? It runs the parks in the rest of Western Sydney. Why not here? Why have SOPA clean the streets and pick up the rubbish and run the libraries of Olympic Park when a totally now refunctional Parramatta Council under the amazing Gail Connolly is a perfectly functioning municipal authority? Why have SOPA as the landlord and spruiker for the major events facilities that Kerry runs when Destination New South Wales and Venues New South Wales are perfectly capable of doing the issue? I don't think we need Liz's team putting out the traffic cones and putting up the bunting every time somebody comes to a gig in Olympic Park. The venue managers are quite capable of doing that themselves. This is no longer a destination as such, it's a range of venues. It's time for them to grow up and run their own marketing. Even with this precinct's capacity to help address Sydney's housing crisis, and it has a big capacity to do that, potentially as Australia's first exclusively high-rise suburb, Jetsonsville I call it. Why do we need SOPA to plan and sell vacant land to developers when Landcom, when Property New South Wales, when Planning New South Wales are all charged with similar responsibilities? I do pay tribute to SOPA's success in environmental remediation of the crappy old place I worked in, an abattoir, an armaments dump, the ubiquitous Homebush Bay. They inherited an awful joint and they've made it lovely, livable and viable again. And their assiduous commitment to community consultation. They are much loved by the local residents. They do a great job, and to your team, Liz, deserve great credit on that. But I think probably more attention could have been paid to the economic vibrancy. I would love as many awards SOPA's got for saving the mangroves. It would be nice to get the same sense of economic vibrancy in non-game day mode, that permanent sense here. As I once infamously said on 2GB, allowing the public service to run a fun precinct like Olympic Park is like asking your mother-in-law to arrange a bucks party. It's just not right. Therefore, in the spirit of consolidation, and as largely most of its centrist coordination role is now done, Olympic Park has grown up. It needs to go back to the community. It needs to go back to the council. It needs other agencies to step up and play their role. We believe that it's time to think about its back end in that cycle and at the same time think about how we ramp up Western Parkland City Authority that's at the other end of the cycle. We want to see a new and more powerful WAPCA with the authority to undertake direct dealings with global investors. It should be granted the power to compulsorily acquire land with the responsibility to deliver a new airport city based on advanced manufacturing, high-tech agribusiness, innovative logistics and a new defence and aerospace industry. Let Jennifer Westacott loose to use the experience and network she has from her time at the BCA, running the Business Council, to drive business to the West, backed in by the Commonwealth's ambitious National Reconstruction Fund that must be invested in winners and not squandered. We can't let the National Reconstruction Fund become the West Invest Fund, squandered on 57,000 dog parks in Dundas instead of a couple of really decent projects that change the world, and this is the place that needs to be centred. Let's let WAPCA be the agency that puts Western Sydney back in the rightful position as the centre of Australian manufacturing, the place where we traditionally make stuff. We'll make it smarter now, not just fabrication, but manufacture and design. And let's deliver on the promise we all made to the kids of Western Sydney of what that place can be. Allow those proud global and local organisations that signed MOUs out at Warwick Farm with the Premier and the Prime Minister so many years ago to finally make the investments they originally planned in the Aerotropolis without enduring the crushing inertia of public procurement processes that are sadly and uniquely a way of life in New South Wales, yet not in our competitor interstate and international markets. It is a footloose global capital we want there, and we cannot ask WAPCA to compete with one hand tied behind its bureaucratic back while Queensland, Victoria, Singapore, Shanghai and increasingly America now with its new fund is just going to go and take them. We've got to get serious. We obviously want WAPCA to defend the public good and observe appropriate probity concerns. We wouldn't want it any other way. But how about imagining that public good interpreted as actually having Hitachi and NEC and Mitsubishi and Northrop Grumman and Vitex and others actually spend more money in the region and create real jobs? I'm telling you, that's public good. That's the public good Western Sydney wants, not another 10 years of bidding processes, unsolicited bids and committee upper house inquiries. Get on with the job. We cannot let the tenants of the Aerotropolis permanently languish in the hell that is due process and bureaucratic quagmire. Look, whether or not Aerotropolis eventually becomes the vibrant city that's planned or just the world's best business park, and the future determines that with the amenity that comes with it. We also want to make sure it adds value to the cities around it and doesn't compete and detract from them. Campbelltown has been let down by everybody since Gough Whitlam promised the world in 1973, 50 years ago, and in announcing the Macarthur Development Corporation, and that can't continue. Penrith was to be the next best thing for so long, but largely now it's been sidelined by just an all-consuming floodplain mandate by both governments now. That it's off the books. Blacktown for that matter too. Liverpool can lay claim rightly to its ambition to be the capital of the Southwest and annex CBD. But none of them can even get the rapid bus links they were promised to get to the airport by Malcolm and Gladys, let alone have the future metro links from the new government that they deserve. So this is the challenge we set out today for our Premier, our new Premier, to reboot delivery in the West, to recommit to actually making it happen and stop just everybody talking about it. This region elected his government to take the strain off local residents in outer suburbs who've been suffering the tyranny of distance, of high tolls, housing scarcity and poor services. But it did not want him to cut back on essential infrastructure or on job creation. While we support, obviously, his sensible housing policy of up, not out, to prioritise airspace in the central river city for greater residential density, including here in Olympic Park, we certainly do not endorse downgrading of the Western Parkland city, nor any policy of housing only and no jobs to match. The Dialogue has publicly supported his plan for another station on the Metro West route and will publicly back Treasury in if it's smart enough, as I think it is, and brave enough, as I hope it is, to introduce a value capture mechanism around the stations to fund the new line. The value capture methodology that Gladys didn't have the muscle to do on the North West line. So the poor nurses in Narellan were paying for the new mansions of the captains of industry of Castle Hill instead of having to put their hand in their kick and be part of the process. However, we will argue that the government's while we will argue for the government's ambition, taxation must be matched by an ambition for more density and greater amenity around those station precincts we're going to pay for. We'll also demand that delays in committing to the Metro West completion end now. Stop mucking around with the Metro West and build it. And the Labor government stop caving into rail unions that would deny the Outer West a modern and driverless metro rail to Liverpool and Campbelltown simply because the union want old red rattlers on the rails with old union mates driving them. That is business as usual, business we should never see again in this city. While we have called for an orderly winding down of SOPA in our paper to save money and to reflect its place in the cycle, we will campaign hard for a ramp-up of WAPCA. Resourced with hardened professionals capable of operating like a driven business to get this Aerotropolis built and secure the investment, the jobs and the amenity to change the West forever. Similarly, we appeal to Prime Minister Albanese. He's always been a great friend of Western Sydney and had the courage to drive this new airport site originally, but his government continues to ask Western Sydney to house, educate and employ a record number of migrants coming our way. Will the Commonwealth declare Simon Hickey's Western Sydney Airport International as an open skies airport? Will it break the nexus with the Qantas monopoly that stops airlines wanting to fly into our airport? Will it eventually relocate SBS from the monocultural North Shore to the multicultural Western Sydney? Will it co-fund an extension of that Metro Rail network line north to Blacktown, east to Liverpool and south to Campbelltown? And finally, will it give us back the money it took off us yesterday for the M7, M12 interchange? You cannot ask Western Sydney to use the new airport if they can't access their new airport. Finally, we've hosted both leaders here for you in the past year. Bit more, 700 twice. They're both competing who had the most people. They both had about 700 people for lunch here. You heard them talk proudly of their fidelity to this region and how this region got them both elected. Well, we want Albo to join with Chris Minns in a brave new partnership to cast off business as usual and return the favour to those Western Sydney families who put them in office. We need them to embrace the once-in-a-century opportunity that Badgerys Creek presents and form a grand coalition of domestic and global investors, together with federal, state and local government, to imagine a bigger, better and brighter future for the 4 million people of Greater Western Sydney that will call this region home by 2050. We've had enough planning, we've had enough big thinking, we've had enough promises. We demand more delivery, greater ambition and a new approach to economic development. Yep, we need more housing, absolutely. Yep, we certainly need better services, but we also need smart jobs and greater amenity as we imagine a sustainable future and livable cities. After all, as the Coalition and Labor know so well, A Western Sydney that is ignored has the political power to truly impose its will. I urge you to all join us in making sure we do get that great future. Thank you very much.